If you close your eyes hard and look carefully past the edge of your periphery, you'll recognize it. Another layer, one normally seen in your subconscious. Something that looks like symbols. That is. Oh, that stuff. Yeah, I know about that. Flowery told me.
He did what? Hello, all you avian appreciators. Hello, all you associates of analytical authors. Hello, oh my god, Nighthawk, we've already done the intro. Why are you still talking? Hey everyone, and welcome to the Anatomy of Dark Worlds Redux. This video is an update to my initial Anatomy of Dark Worlds video, where chapter by chapter I listed all of the details we learned in an attempt to explain how the Dark Worlds worked. This video will feature my many ramblings about how the Dark Worlds function, as well as things that may have changed since the recent update. Chapter 5 gave us a lot of new stuff to chew on, so I wanted to make a new video about it. Let's get into what I got wrong and what we can glean from all of this new information. And we'll top things off with an extra theory that was initially supposed to be its own video. The Dark Worlds are a separate plane of existence. What we know for sure is that when we travel to them, everything changes. The clothes a person is wearing, the items in their pockets, etc. The way we interact with the world changes too. In the Light World, we have this more simplistic menu style. When entering the Dark World, it becomes more complex, most likely to account for the more video game-esque reality. Yes, I know the whole thing is a video game, just roll with me. To create a Dark World, you need a few things. Determination is a big one. As far as we know, Lightners are the only beings confirmed to possess determination. Now, before the Chapter 5 era, I was under the impression that the Shadow Crystal bosses also had a bit of determination, which they obtained from their Shadow Crystals. The assumption was from the basis that the Shadow Crystals were solid determination, and that assumption was wrong. You see, before the new chapter, there was a little sneak peek from Toby Fox's social media, where he showed off some Sham lines. Sham talks about these shadow crystals, how they contain the power of will, the power of, and then Sham trails off. As we know now, that power was the power of lost dreams. So despite determination not being within the shadow crystals, we are still to believe you need determination to make a dark fountain. This is supported by the Queen's monologue at the end of chapter 2. She mentions again this power of the will, which she directly refers to as determination. She also mentions that it's a type of power that every single Lightner possesses. Let the court be aware that Queen is operating on second-hand information, which could be faulty. She was absolutely ignorant to certain things. For example, she was completely unaware of the roaring, so there is a chance she could be dead wrong about the determination requirement. Considering determination was a diegetic power source also present in UNDERTALE, let's just assume for now that determination is a requirement. Another requirement, which seems to be very particular, is that you need some kind of sharp object. Knife, spear, anything sharp, really. The actual mechanical reason for this coincides with the determination requirement to my understanding. Your will is the power, and the instrument, sharp object, is piercing through reality using that weapon and the aforementioned determination. I feel like this interpretation is sound considering the appearance whenever a dark fountain is made. From a singular fixed point, we can see that there is this black substance leaking out of the ground. Darkness, which is what I call this substance, is heavily related to water, as in it carries a lot of its characteristics. The very thing that is being made is called a dark fountain. That tidbit, combined with the flowing water imagery associated with darkness in Rousey's cutscene, we can assume that darkness shares the same properties as water. Assuming this is just darkness leaking out, we can see it quickly fill up a room that it's in. This obviously raises the question of what would happen should a person open a fountain outside. Naturally, we don't know the answer, but we have some wiggle room to speculate. So far, we have only seen a fountain maker open a fountain inside a building. Considering every single time we've seen someone make a fountain for a specific reason, we can assume there is logic behind this choice. Characters don't just do random things for no good reason, they have motivation to do so. Chris most likely made the dark world inside their house to keep people from leaving their house. Let the record show Chris probably had several reasons to make a dark world, but this was one of the reasons. Assuming the Knight made a dark world in Chapter 2, and assuming the Knight is December, they made this dark world to stop people from leaving the library. If both of these assumptions are true, this would be December trying to desensitize her little sister in an attempt to help her overcome her fear of mice and authority figures. No matter what the specific reason, we can assume that Chris and the Knight wanted the dark world to be inside of a building, so we can assume this was always a deliberate choice. Secrecy is absolutely a factor in this. If Chris or the Knight opened up a fountain in broad daylight, then it would be more challenging to act outside the public eye. That is the most obvious reason, although I do wonder if daylight might also be a factor. Just purely from a conceptual standpoint, darkness is the absence of light, so if you were to add light to the equation from, say, the sun, this may interfere with the dark world's ability to do its thing. This is conjecture that really isn't necessary. The secrecy element is perfectly fine. So, dark worlds change everything around them, objects and people. There appears to be a set of unspoken rules about how and what a dark fountain changes. For instance, some objects become consumables, and other objects become sentient people. Seems arbitrary at first, until you take the lighteners into account. The distinction between item and darkner is determined by the actions of the lighteners. Lightener is a blanket term used to describe anyone born in the light world. So far, there is a clear sense of separation that is reinforced by the mechanics of the world as well as the characters who reside in it. The lighteners on top, darkners on the bottom. Lighteners are the ones who bring the darkners into existence and are privileged to be able to move in between worlds freely without issues. You could see them as the gods of the dark world. However, darkners are not always beholden to this. Darkners can fight lighteners, possessing free will. The deciding factor which separates a regular darkner from an item is intent. The intent of the lightener. No matter how warped the dark world makes something, there is always some semblance of the original object present within the darkner. Lancer is a jack of spades, so he has a cute little spade on his belly. The properties of the object persist, so we can assume that the properties which define food from not food are constant. A lightener would typically not eat a playing card. They would play with a playing card. You see, it's based on the intentions that the lightener has. Cards are not for eating, they are for playing, so that inherently gives the item more value in the lightener's eyes. Objects that are given attention from the lighteners are typically going to be the ones to turn into darkners. Attention is the key word here, as it seems like the power of the darkner grows the more attention it received. Throughout all of the dark worlds we have explored, there is always this boss darkner that is in charge. The only outlier here is Chapter 4, but we have enough to assume there's a pattern regardless. Boss darkner is not an official term, although I do feel like the name is fitting. King, Queen, Tenna, and Flowery are all dark world beings that are stronger than their dark world kin. King was played with heavily, and then torn, which is why we can see he has a scar, and he is very bitter towards the lighteners. Queen is the computer in the library that was most certainly used by Noelle to write her personal blog. I said this in my last video, and it confused a few people. They argued that Noelle would simply use her computer at home. It's understandable why people would say this, but there are context clues which would imply that Noelle spends as much time away from home as possible. In Chapter 1, we can see her standing outside her gate, refusing to go and ask her mother for a spare key. And in Chapter 4, she mentions how Chris was there to help her break into her own room. Noelle and her mother have a very shaky relationship. Noelle being the one doing most of the shaking. It's not an outlandish statement to assume that she would spend time in the library typing her troubles away on Queen, the laptop. This would definitely explain why the Queen became so enamored with solving Noelle's problems in the first place. Tenna is arguably stronger than both King and Queen put together, as he was given hours and hours of attention from the Dreamers and the Holidays respectively. We know for a fact that Darkners value this attention. In the cutscene at the end of Chapter 3, make note of the order in which the figures fade away. December fades away first because she disappears, then Carol, and so on. If you look, we see that Toriel was the last one remaining. Tenna references how fond he is of Toriel for this. How Toriel was the last one to really give me a good look back then. Darkners remember the way they are treated, both positively and negatively. It seems as though what determines the strength of a Darkner is how much attention they are given. It seems arbitrary, but it does make sense. If the Dark World needs determination, then your will determines what you focus on, what you give your attention to. Both logically and thematically, it just makes sense. That about covers how a Dark World is made, so let's discuss the role of the Fountain Maker. Like I said, a Lightner is the one who makes the fountain. As a result, they seem to have a good bit of control in what is inside the world. So the interpretation I am going with is that the Dark World itself is created using the Light World environment as a framework. But also, the Darkner's appearances are determined by the psyche of the Lightner. It's a mix of both. The environment and the mind of the Lightner are a mold that the darkness is filling, kind of like Play-Doh. For example, the mouse Darkner are literal computer mice, but they are also in the form of mice because Noelle has a deep fear of them. The reason why the Shadow Men appear in Chris's Dark World is because there is an underlying mystery regarding their human heritage. Chris is a human, however they seemingly have no understanding of humans, so we have these shadowy human figures. Perhaps from their scarce memories? These are very interpretive understandings, and there is a reason for that. Creating a Dark World is like creating one great work of art. We can see in its composition that there are parts of the Dark World that are directly associated with the Fountain Maker, both consciously and subconsciously. Whenever you look at an artist's piece, you have the ability to understand them in a very indirect way. There are emotions and aspects that an artist intentionally places into an art piece. And because we know the subconscious exists, there are also aspects of an artist's work that they weren't aware of, which also made it into their work. You are molded by your life experience, and most people are only somewhat aware of how these events have affected them, if at all. So I mentioned before how Lightners can move between worlds at will. Technically, Darkners can too, but there is a catch. If a Darkner is moved to another world which they don't have a purpose in, they turn to stone. There was no further mention of this in Chapter 5, so I can only assume that all of the information we were given from the previous chapters is the information we need. It's hard to tell sometimes if Toby Fox ever watches any Deltarune content. He outright says he doesn't in the most recent newsletter, so I'll take his word for it. Although I do feel like he knows the general consensus of how the community is feeling about any given chapter, which I would imagine could only be ascertained from everyone's current running theories. But I digress. My current running theory is that a Darkner can move to any Dark World they choose, as long as they find a purpose within. Lancer didn't have a purpose in the Cyber Dark World, so he turned to stone pretty quickly. However, he lasted a lot longer when he was given the ability to test controllers in Chapter 3. If a Darkner has a purpose, they will not turn to stone. Okay, so these are the Dark Worlds as far as I understand them. Believe it or not, Chapter 5 expanded the Dark World lore in a multitude of ways. Like, we got entirely new kinds of Dark World entities. Actually, some of them aren't even Darkners. Let's talk about that. Pretty much the entire plot of Chapter 5 revolves around these new flower characters, and they also give us the majority of new Dark World information. We won't be talking about their character traits today, that is a topic for another video. Today we're talking about their existence purely from a mechanical perspective. Chapter 5 really pushed the boundaries of what the Dark Worlds were capable of, or at the very least, answered some questions that may have been on people's minds. We've had objects becoming Darkners, we've had objects containing the dust of fallen Lightners becoming Darkners, and now we have two new Dark World entities never seen before. On the way up to the cliffs area, Susie asks what these colorful new characters are, and Rouse simply responds, calling them flowers. Not darkners, not lightners, just flowers. In Chapter 3, we saw replicas of the cacti present in Chris's house, so initially it seemed like plants weren't really affected by the Dark World. Until you take note of the S-rank room. Going to this particular curtain in the back room, you can get this flavor text which describes something pushing you away, and something spiny sticking into Chris's hand. This implies that the person behind the curtain specifically is the cactus from the hallway. We never see this Dark World entity, however, we can assume this is the first instance of a plantner. For the record, plantner is not a good name, but until we get something better, that's what I'm going with. Plants are not darkners necessarily. As explained by Flowery, they are living beings. This distinction seems important, but not too important, as at the end of the day, the flowers are still subject to the same rules and regulations as normal darkners. Arguably, you could say the plantners are weaker than most darkners, as they need to be kept alive. The flowers need to be fed, they need to be watered, and they need to be kept in very specific conditions. You would think they'd be super weak, but surprisingly, they are some of the strongest entities we've seen so far. Seth can throw away your mercy like it's nothing. Aqua can inspect you. Flowery can do all that maximum stat nonsense. So, what gives? What makes these flowers so strong? Well, I have a theory for you, if you'll indulge me. Well, technically it's two theories. The flowers are in Asgore's flower shop, and despite the distinction, they carry a lot of the same qualities of regular darkners. They have memories of their surroundings, for instance. Asgore has a corkboard in his shop, and we know that Asgore has a habit of talking to his flowers. With Chapter 5, we get a hard confirmation that Asgore not only knew about the Dark World's existence, but also obsessed over them for years. Asgore either rolled that corkboard out of his back room, or just straight up talked to his flowers about the Dark Worlds. As a result, the flowers were already brought up to speed. At least, they knew as much as Asgore knew. The only thing they didn't know was how to be human. That knowledge, combined with all of that attention Asgore gave them, created a perfect storm for some game-breaking flowers. There's that, and also the reason could just be because they are flowers. These extraordinary traits could be a genuine result of their nature. They are very unique Dark World entities, after all. Plants have senses, believe it or not. They can sense light, obviously, but they can also sense gravity, chemical changes in the air, and vibrations in the ground. Flowery particularly explains how the plants have sensed something beneath the town that is unimaginable. I will say I'm not sure of the logistics of this, considering Flowery and the other flowers are encased inside their glass containers. I'd figure they would have to be directly connected to the ground to sense anything beneath the town. Maybe the Dark World in Asgore's flower shop connected them to the shelter Dark World via the water pipes, I guess? I don't know. The point is, plants literally see the world in a different way compared to you and me. When they were given consciousness, they could have used this unique perspective to understand the Dark Worlds. The Dark Worlds brought these plants to life, so it potentially empowered these plants' senses or even changed them in certain ways. Honestly, the first theory is probably stronger. Despite how different the flowers are from typical darkners, they still follow a lot of the same mannerisms of darkners. For instance, they serve a lightener, Asgore specifically, the man who gave them all this attention. It seems as though Flowery in particular is the leader, calling the shots and organizing the team. As far as I can tell, the only reason for Flowery being valued above all the others is the fact that Asgore had him around the longest. There is a mention of Flowery being there during Asgore's college years, so it could very much be inferred that Flowery came before all the others. There are multiple reasons why the flowers are as strong as they are. Honestly, take your pick. The only thing we can say for sure is that Flowery is the strongest. Looking into Flowery's menu, we can see Bro maxed out all of his stats. This is all for naught, as he managed to lose against the plot anyways. The universe destined him to fail, so he did. Stats are not something exclusive to the Dark World, but it seems like the Dark World stats are much easier to change. Let the record show, while there are stats in the Light World, we don't know if they work exactly the same as the stats in the Dark World. I am more leaning towards the fact that they aren't, considering Chris's stats stay the same even if you have the Black Shard. The Black Shard stays the same whether in the Light World or the Dark World, but even though Chris has it, their stats do not change. The only thing that really changes in the Light World is health and money isn't even a stat. And health is only altered by very specific events. I feel like some people are still potentially waiting for the Undertale battle screen to come up later, and at the risk of being proven wrong, I'd say it's unlikely. The stats are present, and they do serve as a method to ascertain how a character is feeling. Chris and Susie eating all the chocolates, for instance. I've gone on record saying that the stats of Deltarune are pointless. The Dark Worlds have this structure that is akin to a video game. You've played a video game, right? Within these fabled video games, you have stats that increase the qualities of your character. Higher attack stat means you do more damage. Higher defense stat means you take less damage. These are the rules of the Dark World as we have come to understand them. Flowery understands these rules. He understands what is being requested of him, and he simply refuses. He refuses to accept the limitations that have been placed upon him. He plays the game, but he gives himself an unfair advantage, because he understands that in truth, the stats are pointless. The stats only matter if you abide by them. Rules are a suggestion. Back in the days of Chapter 1 theory crafting, there was this idea floating around that everything that happened in the Dark World was fake. I can't remember how much traction this idea had back then, although I do know that it is mostly disregarded today. Now I will say, I agree with this sentiment, and I do think that everything in the Dark World is real and has real consequences. Although I also think there are aspects of make-believe theory that can be salvaged. We see with the actions of the flowers that the rules of the Dark Worlds are simply suggestions. You don't have to be spared if you don't want to. No matter how nice you are to a Darkner, there is a chance they will attack and resent you. Free will is a thing, so while the stats can be used to gain context on certain things, they are ultimately pointless. I should make myself super clear here. I'm not saying the stats and the game's UI are not viable methods for crafting theories. I'm not saying you should outright ignore them. I'm saying that if we only look at it from a video game lens, we will lose sight of what is really important. Flowery did not lose against the Knight because the Knight had 100 in all stats and Flowery only had 99. The Knight beat him because the Knight's will was stronger. Their resolve was stronger. Their imagination was stronger. Their determination was stronger. During the fight, Flowery unloads all of the damage into the Knight, and it looks like it's actually doing something. The Knight even reverts back into its state when you beat it in Chapter 3. The Knight is humoring this engagement. As a Lightner, the Knight possesses more determination than Flowery, and therefore their will is stronger. Considering the stats can easily be ignored, the only logical conclusion is that real power in the Dark World is measured in will. No matter how determined Flowery was, he could never surpass a Lightner. No matter what, he is a flower. This, unfortunately, is one rule that is not a suggestion. No matter what, it seems a Lightner will always be stronger than a Darkner. Now that we know that the power of will can make a dark fountain, and we also know that the same exact will determines how much agency over the Dark Worlds you have, I would say with confidence that the world runs on make-believe dream logic. Once a Dark World being realizes just how open-ended the world is, it seems like one of three things happen. They lose themselves, like Jevil. They utilize the game to benefit themselves as much as possible, like Flowery. Or, in Rousey's case, they become stunned with indecision. When you think about everything Flowery does with his knowledge, it's kind of insane. Forget about the stats for a second, he just starts making stuff. He makes a brand new currency called Flowery Dollars, a currency that Rousey believes to be pointless, although Flowery gives the currency a use of his own design. There are several objects scattered throughout the Dark World which bear Flowery's face, including, but probably not limited to, shrubbery, laddery, cherry, spikery, and signery, proving that Flowery can just make things if he wants to. Are these objects Darkners? Probably not, but they talk, so it's just like, probably not Darkners. So from this comes an even greater revelation. If you have enough knowledge regarding the Dark Worlds, you can just start adding things to the game. It's literally a sandbox. The world is your oyster. Do whatever you want. And yes, unfortunately, it's true. Even the Dark Worlds are burdened by the nonsense of cryptocurrency. Seriously though, not only are the stats non-binding, the things inside the Dark World are not set either. There is no Light World counterpart to Cherry, or Signery, or Spikery, but Flowery made it so. It's really that simple. I mean, people in our world that have an acute knowledge of things like chemistry can do some pretty magical things. Think of the flowers as the witches and mages of the Dark World. Well, not the literal witches and mages, you get what I'm trying to say. So now with that out of the way, let's get into the recursive... Huh? Oh, I see. I forgot about the last flower. This is pink, which opens up an entirely new can of worms when it comes to what is possible. Again, not talking about character, talking about mechanics today. Character comes later. Within pink, we find a Darkner frame, which is of course the Mew Mew doll, which houses a ghost Lightner. This would be the first time we see a union between Lightner and Darkner, at least one that carried on for a long period of time. This was an interesting question that I'm pretty sure was posed at some point in the past. What would happen if a ghost Lightner inhabited an object that became a Darkner? Would there be a tug of war? Would there be any interesting questions of autonomy? Yes and yes. The ghost is dissatisfied with her body, or her lack of body, so she inhabited the Mew Mew doll. Inside this doll, she felt complete. It seems like she was doing this for a while. When the Dark World opened, the doll was changed, becoming a Darkner. It seems as though both the Darkner and the Lightner have control over the body, but the Darkner has the final say over what the body does. The parallels between Chris and Pink are not lost on me, but I have an entire Chris video to make, so we'll save that for later. The key distinction here is between an entity like Pink and an entity like Gerson. Gerson Boom was a Lightner who passed away. The Dark World object in question, the globe with the hammer and his dust inside, used his appearance and his essence as a blueprint to recreate a very convincing version of Gerson Boom. The Gerson Boom we meet in Chapter 4 is a Darkner. This is, in all subjective forms, Gerson Boom. However, he was still a Darkner. He could only exist in very specific darknesses. Ghosts, although technically dead, are still subject to all of the benefits that would befit a Lightner, most likely because they were still born in the Light World. This to me is irrefutable proof that the worlds are divided completely, and this division is a vital part of Deltarune as a whole. There is no denying this division. This is a law of the worlds that might as well be as overbearing as the prophecy itself. You can play your way around the rules all you want. You cannot cross them. Darkner is Darkner and Lightner is Lightner. Life and death are not ways you can use to cheat the system, and you cannot use the Dark Worlds to cheat death. At least, not forever. But I have a feeling someone is going to try. Okay, so to cap off this video, I'll be talking about a theory as a bit of a bonus feature. Technically, the Anatomy of Dark Worlds video is over, and this theory is something extra. This theory was initially supposed to be its own video, but I ran into a roadblock. Well, a few roadblocks, but that's not important right now. I have simply decided to tack this theory on the end of this video as a sort of bonus, so now I am personally less stressed out about it. So there you go. Here is the recursive narrative structure theory. This theory has a few caveats. The first caveat is that this theory is sort of old news, in more ways than one. There is a good chance that many of you have seen the recursive narrative structure as well as believe it exists. You probably just haven't paid enough attention to it, or heard it called that. Also, I've already talked about this theory for another game. I talked about this theory in my one-shot analysis. The second caveat is this is not a time loop theory. While there is a theme of recurring narrative beats within Deltarune, this is not me stating that the entirety of Deltarune is a time loop that will be reset on the game's conclusion. Much like the recurring thematic narrative beats present throughout the game, we will notice similarities but also differences. This is not a time loop. If I'm being honest, I have no idea what the time frame on the narrative structure is. Not an exact time frame anyways. The thesis of the recursive narrative structure theory is as follows. Deltarune is an example of multiple narrative worlds connected to each other through thematic resonance as well as literal physical connections. The connecting structure is what I will be calling the recursive narrative structure. Each specified world in Deltarune is divided into its own level with its own characteristics. Each world is regarded as a narrative. All of these narratives are stacked on top of each other in a large structure. These narratives are all different, just as they are the same, and it is possible to move in between. When I say narrative, I am not talking about simply the story. I am talking about everything. The NPCs, the events, the locations, everything that encompasses a world, that is what I mean when I say narrative. The light world is a narrative, and the dark world is a narrative. The concept of recurring narratives throughout Deltarune has been ever present, almost overbearing in execution. The narrative of the prophecy is a vital part of the world. This is actually the source of a lot of Deltarune's drama. Our cute and cuddly characters are made aware of an impending doom that is not desirable. Still, they press on because that is the nature of narratives. It's something that progresses, like a track of beads in one of those hospital waiting rooms. Or a train barreling down a track that isn't finished. No matter what, the track will continue on its path. The prophecy, a representation of the game's narrative, is set to play out, and according to everything we know, there is no changing it. The prophecy, as overbearing as it is known about in the light world and the dark world. This narrative is heavily implied to have inspired Lord of the Hammer, a time-remembered novel series that takes the prophecy and changes it ever so slightly. Lord of the Hammer was very successful, spreading throughout the world, giving the writer, Gerson Boom, a great amount of reverence when he was still alive. The success of Lord of the Hammer inspired the success of Dragon Blazers, a long-running in-universe video game series which Noelle and Susie enjoy quite a bit. This can absolutely be seen as a standard practice when it comes to how art inspires more art. Deltarune is a game that takes inspiration from several other games, the Mother series mostly. Toby Fox has even jokingly said that if Mother 3 ever comes to the West, people can play it and realize just how unoriginal he is.
If it comes to the West, you can play it and realize how unoriginal I am.
Personally, I am of the belief that this is just the natural order of things. Art inspires more art. This is how it's always been. Toby can take as much inspiration from other games as he wants. Everyone does this, whether they know it or not. The reason for me pointing all of this out is to ascertain the purpose of all of these recurring narrative beats. Why are these prophetic stories being repeated over and over again? Why did the prophecy inspire Lord of the Hammer? And why did Lord of the Hammer inspire Dragon Blazers? If we know that the prophecy is a fundamental part of the world itself, then, like other diegetic elements, we can assume there is a reason for this. By the way, keep that order in mind, will you? It's very important to remember what inspired what. I have come to the conclusion that this theme of recurring narratives is a representation of how the actual world of Deltarune is structured. These recurring narratives are a representation of the recursive narrative structure. And with Chapter 5, we have proof that there is a structure that connects the worlds together. And how do I plan to prove that? With context clues, of course. Every time we see people travel into a dark world from the outside, they fall downwards. In Chapter 1, 2, 4, and 5, we see examples of this. Chapter 3 is the only outlier, as in this chapter we see Chris and Susie travel through this door, and they don't need to travel upward to leave. I should mention, this is accounted for in the other chapters, as to leave most dark worlds you need to enter this pillar of light, which raises you back up to the surface. I'll admit, Chapter 3 is a bit of an outlier, but I have a potential explanation. Keep in mind who made this dark world. Chris Dreamer, the rogue non-binary who wants us to have as little information as possible. They made this dark world, and more importantly, they made this dark world with a plan in mind. A deal that was struck with Tenna. Instructions: keep the party busy until the night arrives. And looking back, we don't see a whole lot of Chapter 3's Dark World, now do we? Chapter 3 is set in an area where you walk upon this wide array of scaffolding. This would absolutely imply that you are in a very high place. If Chris wanted to limit the amount of information we get, then there is a very good chance that they specifically designed this dark world in such a way to hide a much more interesting dark world below. Either way, considering the scaffolding, you could assume that Chapter 3 takes place up high in the dark world to account for this connection to the light world. No light pillar required. The dark worlds have this sense of space. Most of the time, you travel down to enter them. Exceptions aside, this is something we know. Space implies a distance that needs to be traveled. When entering the dark world from the light world, you need to travel a distance. Now, when I say structure, you guys probably think I mean some kind of solid metallic structure, like the scaffolding here. Well, I'll be real, I don't know exactly what the structure is made of, and honestly, it's more of a connecting tissue, if anything. Chapter 5 proved that this structure exists, and it's all thanks to this little thing. In Chapter 2, you get this gift, which changes depending on who you give it to. Giving it to Rouse will mean giving him his first real possession. But if you give it to Susie, this happens. Rouse nuzzles the Susie plush, causing her to toss both the plush and Rouse out of bounds, into this seemingly black endless void. While in this void, the two of them float adrift as if gravity doesn't exist here. This space in between proves that there is a recursive narrative structure. Huh? What? Who said that? What? Edgeworth? Nighthawk, what are you talking about? The floaty weightlessness implies that there is no structure out there. Rouse is simply floating in an empty void. No gravity implies no need for structure of any kind. Castletown may have structure, but it's simply floating in an endless space. No interconnecting structure to speak of. Your point is worthless, and your hat blends in too much with the background. Well, I'll give you that one. But also, objection! Not so fast. Watch closely, Edgeworth. There are walls out there. Barriers where a person will collide with something. Barriers means walls. Walls means structure. Also, if you think that Castletown is just a singular structure floating in a vacuum, that is also not the case, as we have already established that the Dark Worlds are not in motion. The Dark World and Light World are both in a fixed point. If they were moving independently from each other, Chris and Susie would enter the Dark World at a new place every single time they enter and exit Castletown. We know for a fact they don't. The light pillars are connections, and the walls, which encompass the rooms and areas of the Dark World, make up the structure. The recursive narrative structure is real. Sorry, I've been getting into Phoenix Wright recently. Now you may be wondering what the significance of all of this is. Well, if we travel back to the recurring narrative themes from before, we see a series of 3 levels, not 2. We have the prophecy layer, the hammer layer, and the dragon layer. So the real question is, which is which? We know 2/3 of the worlds that have parallels. So which is which, and where is the missing world? The Waltz of Sika Masada. Man Country. Man Country has been a glaring elephant in Deltarune for some time. Ever since Chapter 3, we mostly haven't been able to make heads or tails of this. Man Country is essentially the Chapter 3 egg room. But unlike all the other egg rooms, this place is much bigger, and it looks to be where the Forgotten Man lives. Or at least, this is the only place where he can speak. Everything is different here. The area is in more of an 8-bit style rather than Deltarune's usual 16-bit style. When you enter this area, Chris is in their light world form rather than their dark world form. And when you're done talking to the Forgotten Man, you don your dark world form. It's almost like this world carries the properties of both the light and the dark worlds respectively. Talking to the Forgotten Man behind the tree, he will tell you a story.
Once upon a time, the world looked like this. The world changed. Society was developed. The earth was covered in water. Dinosaurs appeared. An ice age. Actually, there are still dinosaurs. Is it mixed up? In any case, this island is the only place left I can talk.
The Forgotten Man is telling us that this is how the world initially looked, but something happened. The Forgotten Man is in both the dark world and the light world, but this world in particular is the only place he can speak. The actual specifics of what happened in this world are not clear. Potentially, this world could have been subject to its own version of the Roaring, and it has already been destroyed. This would explain why there is barely anything left of it. If we take a look at this world from a meta standpoint, we know that 8-bit video games predated 16-bit video games. I would elaborate further, but I'm sorry, I just don't have the time to get into history of video game graphics today. My source is, trust me bro, 8-bit games came before 16-bit. This world came before the others, and it is implied that there was some kind of event, an ice age perhaps. Now this is all that remains of this specific world. So I think with this, we have our base. Man Country, or this world that is now referred to as Man Country, was the first. The Dark World is in between, and finally the Light World rests on top. This world came first, which is why it carries the properties of both the light and the dark worlds, respectively. This is also seemingly why the Forgotten Man can travel in between the light and dark worlds. And that is the long and short of the recursive narrative structure. The worlds we visit are interconnected, and the earliest world was destroyed, leaving only Man Country left. Man Country was the first layer, or maybe there was even a layer before that. Who knows? Perhaps this calamity is why the other worlds are so doomed. If this layer is the prophecy layer, then the other layers are surely to suffer the same fate. Maybe the fact that this world in particular was seemingly destroyed means that all of the others will be destroyed too. Now, when it comes to Gaster and his experimentation, it's unclear if Gaster also made Man Country, or he just found that world and built the dark and light worlds on top of it. I'm not fully sold on either assumption, honestly. And that is everything. There you have it, the updated Anatomy of Dark Worlds video. Here's hoping that Chapter 6 doesn't completely change the way we understand Dark Worlds, so this video can last a chapter. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you could, please follow me on all my socials. I am on Tumblr, BlueSky. I also have a Discord server, where we are over 500 members strong and growing every day. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. If you would like to directly support me and everything I'm doing on the channel, please consider becoming a member today. And thank you to all the current members. Thank you Lillico. Thank you Vantum. Thank you Kiriyami. Thank you Avast Antivirus. Thank you Savvy Sillybug. Thank you Gaston Zumbo. Thank you Fluby. Thank you Heboi. Thank you Mine. Thank you Iceberger. Thank you J-Dog the Jester. Thank you Lucas. Thank you Lumen Scented. Thank you Gussie. Thank you Calypso Love. Thank you Jade. Thank you Tamak. Thank you Iru Pop. Thank you Norkbork. Thank you Luna Asashiho. Thank you Pab Gamer. Thank you LJ Afton. Thank you Dr. Dirty Legs. Thank you Juan. Thank you Blueberry Baya. Thank you BRTV. Thank you Wrinkles on Paper. Thank you CSC and Fire. Thank you Splitsy Von Sweets. Thank you HC Luna. Thank you Fantastic Mister. Thank you Vixillion. Thank you Epic Cool Guy. Thank you Depressed Cowboys Fan. Thank you Gutsuka. Thank you all so much. Your support is greatly appreciated.